Welcome to Warhammer 40k 8th edition, Battle Report 17, 1850 points, Death Guard versus Tzeentch. This will be the Maelstrom of War mission, Race to Victory, and we will be playing on a random map deployment. Let's start off by taking a look at the board and where the objectives have been placed. Starting in this corner with this 2 foot by 2 foot section, we have objective marker 3 right here next to this ruin. Then in this 2 foot by 2 foot section, objective marker 4 is right here next to this crater. Lastly, on this side of the board, we have this 2 foot by 2 foot section. We have objective marker 6 right here next to this crater. Then moving over to the other side of the board, starting with this 2 foot by 2 foot section, we have objective marker 1 next to this ruin. Second to last is this 2 foot by 2 foot section, with objective marker 2 next to this crater. And then finally, in this corner, this 2 foot by 2 foot section, and objective number 5 is right here, next to this ruin. And so now we will roll off for which random map deployment the armies will be setting up on today. And here's the roll. Getting a 4, which is Hammer and Anvil. And so on a roll of a 1, 2, or a 3, the Death Guard will begin deploying on the near side, and Tzeentch will begin deploying on the far side. On a 4, 5, or 6, Tzeentch will begin deploying on the near side, and the Death Guard will begin deploying on the far side. And so here's the dice roll, getting a 1, and so the Death Guard will begin deploying on the near side, and Tzeentch will deploy on the far side. And now on a 1, 2, or 3, the Death Guard will begin deploying first, and on a 4, 5, or 6, Tzeentch will begin deploying first. Getting a 5, so Tzeentch will begin deploying first. We will be back after the deployment. And so now the armies have finished deploying. Tzeentch began to deploy first, but Death Guard finished deploying first, and so Death Guard will go first unless Tzeentch is able to seize the initiative. But before we take a look at where the armies were placed on the board, there is one thing that we need to do, and that is we need to roll for how many extra command points the Tzeentch army will have in this battle, thanks to Kairos Fateweaver being their warlord. And so here's the dice roll, getting an additional 2 command points for this battle, which will bring them up to a total of 8. And of course, Death Guard will have 6 command points in this battle report. We will start by taking a look at the Death Guard deployment, going from right to left from Tzeentch's perspective. So first we have the Plague Burst Crawler, next we have one of the Demon Princes of Nurgle, then we have the first squad of Nurgling Swarms sitting on objective marker 6, then we have Mortarion sitting inside of this crater. Next to Mortarion is the second Demon Prince of Nurgle. Next to the Demon Prince is the Chaos Land Raider with the Plague Marines, Plague Surgeon, Malignant Plague Caster, and Tallyman all embarked inside. And then finally, back here is the final squad of Nurgling Swarms, and they are sitting on objective marker 1. Now taking a look at the Tzeentch deployment, going from right to left as well, but from Death Guard's perspective. Starting off with the Blue Soul Grinder of Tzeentch, then the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword and the Impossible Robe. The first squad of Pink Horrors is in the back here, sitting on objective marker 5. Kairos Fateweaver, the Warlord, Magnus the Red. The second squad of Pink Horrors, this squad has the icon and the instrument. In the way back is the final squad of Pink Horrors, sitting on objective marker 3. And then finally, the Silver Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. And so now Tzeentch will attempt to seize the initiative, and they are looking for a 6, and they fail with a 5. So let's go into Death Guard, turn 1. Going into Death Guard turn 1, a reminder that the Death Guard have 6 command points, and Tzeentch has 8 command points. Death Guard began by drawing 3 new tactical objective cards, and they drew Assassinate, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy character was destroyed during this turn. If 3 or more enemy characters were destroyed during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. Blood and Guts, score 1 victory point if an enemy unit was destroyed during the fight phase of this turn. If 3 or more enemy units were destroyed during the fight phase of this turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Defend Objective 5, score 2 victory points if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of 2 consecutive turns. And Objective Marker 5 is right here, back in the Tzeentch deployment zone, currently being held by a group of Pink Horrors. So going into the movement phase, the Death Guard will start by having this squad of Nurgling Swarms sitting on Objective Marker 1 remain still. Next, this squad of Nurgling Swarms sitting on Objective Marker 6 will also remain still. Next, this Plague Burst Crawler is going to move up the board up to 6 inches. It does have a 9-inch movement since it's at full health, but we don't want the Plague Burst Crawler getting too close to the Tzeentch deployment zone yet. And it will actually move up more like 7.5 to 8 inches, and this way the Demon Prince can move up the board 6 inches, so that next turn it can potentially charge Tzeentch, but also this way then it cannot be targeted as long as it stays back a little bit, because the Plague Burst Crawler will be closer for targeting purposes. And so the Demon Prince will end up here, and this way also the Plague Burst Crawler will be able to reroll hit rolls of 1 when shooting. Then over on this side of the board, the Land Raider is going to move up 3 or 4 inches to get a little closer to the Tzeentch deployment zone, but not enough to really be at threat from a charge from the Lord of Change. And it will finish its movement here, and all of the units inside will remain embarked. Next, Mortarion is going to move up to 12 inches up the board just to get into this crater, and really only moving up the board about 9 inches, and he will be here. And now, because of where Mortarion is positioned, which will affect targeting on this Demon Prince will now move up a few inches to about here. And it will finish its movement here. This way it is in a better position to assist down the road in the game, but he is still not the closest visible enemy unit to any of the Tzeentch models, and so this way he cannot be targeted with shooting attacks. Going into the Psychic phase, for Death Guard turn 1, Mortarion is the only unit that is able to cast Psychic powers this turn because both Demon Princes are over 18 inches away from the Tzeentch deployment zone, and so he will attempt to manifest Miasma of Pestilence and Blades of Putrefaction onto himself. The Lord of Change, however, is within 24 inches, and so can attempt to deny both psychic tests. So, starting with Miasma of Pestilence on himself, it needs a 6, and he gets it with an 11. That's a very good psychic test roll. The Lord of Change will attempt to deny the Witch, and it does with a 12, thanks to the +2 from his psychic test bonus. That's a start. Really thought an 11 was going to be a guaranteed pass, but apparently not. So now Blades of Putrefaction, which needs a 5, and he fails with a 3. But just in case Magnus decides to charge him in Tzeentch turn 1, they will use 1 command point, going from 6 down to 5, in order to re-roll the 1. And here's the re-roll, getting it with a 6. So now the Lord of Change will attempt to deny the Witch, and does with a 9. So Blades of Putrefaction will not go off. Going into the shooting phase for Death Guard turn 1, the Death Guard will start with this Plague Burst Crawler, which did move. However, the Death Guard are going to use the stratagem Blasphemous Machines, which is worth 1 command point, so it will take them from 5 down to 4. Use this stratagem just before a Death Guard vehicle attacks in the shooting phase until the end of the phase. That vehicle can ignore the penalties for moving and firing heavy weapons, or for advancing and firing assault weapons. And so the Plague Burst Crawler will fire its Plague Burst Mortar and its 2 Entropy Cannons onto the Soul Grinder, and it will fire its Heavy Slugger onto these Pink Horrors. So, starting with the Heavy Slugger, 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up and vulnerable saves, fails 1 and passes 1. And so 1 Pink Horror will go down. Now for the 2 Entropy Cannons onto the Soul Grinder, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and it fails to wound. But now that it's the shooting phase, Death Guard is going to use 1 command point for 1 command reroll, bringing them from 4 down to 3 in order to reroll that 1. So looking for a 3 to wound, and gets the wound. 1 4-up and vulnerable save, which fails, and this will do d6 damage, and it will do 3 damage. And so the Silver Soul Grinder will drop from 14 starting wounds down to 11. And finally, the Plague Burst Mortar, d6 shots, getting 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound. 1 4-up and vulnerable save, which passes. So finally, in the shooting phase, since Mortarion is outside of 18-inch range from anyone in the Tzeentch deployment zone, this Land Raider will fire, and it will shoot its Combi Bolter into the Lord of Change, since it's the only target within 24-inch range. It will shoot its twin heavy bolter into this squad of pink horrors that lost one pink horror from the Plague Burst crawler, and the Chaos Land Raider will fire its two twin last cannons into the Silver Soul Grinder. So, starting with the combi bolter at full range onto the Lord of Change. 2 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit, and of course not rolling a 1 for the miss, so he can't re-roll it. Wounding on a 5, and fails to wound. Now the 6 shots from the twin heavy bolter onto the pink horrors, hitting on 3s, getting 4 hits and 1 reroll. And here's the reroll, getting a 5th hit. Wounding on 3s, and getting 4 wounds. 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass 3 of them. But that does mean that 1 more pink horror will go down. Finally, the 2 twin last cannons onto the Silver Soul Grinder. 4 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits and 1 reroll. And here's the reroll, getting a 4th hit. Wounding on 3s, and getting 4 wounds. 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 3. And Tzeentch will use 1 command point, going from 8 down to 7 in order to re-roll the 3. And here's the reroll, which still fails, so 3 will go through. So 3d6 damage, and that is 12 damage. And so with 1 point of overkill, that will kill off the Soul Grinder for first blood. And so, going into the assault phase, now that the shooting phase is over, there are no charges to declare, and because of that, there's nothing to resolve in the fight phase, but we do have 1 test to take in the morale phase. This squad of pink horrors did lose 2 models this turn, and with the leadership of 7, they could fail and lose 1 more model if they roll a 6, but since they have an icon, if they roll a 1, they will get d6 models back. And so here's the roll, getting a 2, which means nothing happens. And so, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Death Guard failed to complete Assassinate, they failed to complete Blood and Guts, and they failed to complete Defend Objective 5. And Death Guard will throw away Defend Objective 5. And so, at the end of Death Guard turn 1, thanks to killing that Soul Grinder for first blood, the score currently sits at 1 victory point for the Death Guard and 0 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 1, a reminder that Tzeentch has 7 command points left, and the Death Guard have 3 command points left. And so Tzeentch drew 3 new tactical objective cards. They drew the Great Game. Roll a dice at the end of each turn after generating this objective. Score that number of victory points if you control exactly that number of objective markers. For example, if you roll a 3, you will score 3 victory points if you control 3 objective markers. Secure Objective 4, score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 4 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 4 is right here next to this crater, and within an advance roll away from those pink horrors. Finally, they drew Overwhelming Firepower, score 1 victory point if an enemy unit was destroyed during the shooting phase of your turn. If 3 or more enemy units were destroyed during the shooting phase of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. And going into the movement phase, this squad of pink horrors sitting on objective marker 3 will remain still. Next, this squad of pink horrors, which has 8 models left in the squad, will move 6 inches up the board, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 6 inches, and they add 1 thanks to their instrument for 7 inches of advance, which means 13 inches of total movement. And they will finish their movement right here, and they are now within 3 inches of the center of objective marker 4. This squad of pink horrors, sitting on objective marker 5, will remain still. The blue Soul Grinder is going to move 8 inches up the board, and it will finish its movement right here. Next, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will move up the board 12 inches. And the Lord of Change will finish its movement right here. It is 9.5 inches away from the Chaos Land Raider. Now the Warlord, Kairos Fateweaver, will move up to 12 inches up the board, and he will finish his movement up here. Finally, Magnus the Red will move 16 inches up the board, and Magnus will finish his movement right there. Going into the Psychic phase for Tzeentch turn 1, Tzeentch will begin by using the stratagem Locus of Conjuration for 2 command points, which will bring them from 7 down to 5. Use this stratagem at the start of your Psychic phase. Select a Tzeentch demon character from your army. Until the end of the phase, you can re-roll any failed Psychic tests made for friendly Tzeentch demon units within 6 inches of the model. And so to start us off, this squad of Pink Horrors, which has 8 models, will attempt to manifest Smite onto Mortarion, since he is the closest visible enemy unit. So the Pink Horrors are looking for a 5 or a 6, and they fail with a 3. Also, while I've been filming, Kairos Fateweaver on top of this ruin has fallen over a couple of times, so because of wobbly model syndrome, I'm going to place him behind here just so that he doesn't fall over anymore. But for all intents and purposes, his model is up here. And if I need to measure for range for anything, I will place him back, measure, and then put him back down on the floor, because he has now fallen over twice and knocked the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword with him a couple of times as well. So I'm going to take him off of there for now, but just know his base is supposed to be right here. So now Kairos Fateweaver, and pretend that he's sitting right here, will cast Psychic Powers next. He will attempt to manifest Gaze of Fate, and then he will attempt to manifest Infernal Gateway and Smite onto Mortarion. And he was just within 12 inches of Mortarion, and I just measured, he's actually only about 8.5 inches away from Mortarion. And so because of that, he is in range for Infernal Gateway, which has a range of 12 inches. So starting with Gaze of Fate, which has a warp charge value of 6, and he gets it with a 7. And so the Demon Prince in between the Land Raider and Mortarion will attempt to deny the Witch, looking for an 8, and gets it with a 10. So Gaze of Fate fails to go off. So now Kairos will attempt to manifest Infernal Gateway, which has a warp charge value of 8. And he gets it with an 11. And the Demon Prince in between Mortarion and the Land Raider is within 3 inches of Mortarion, and so he will be affected by Infernal Gateway as well. But first, can Mortarion deny the Witch, needing a 12? And he fails. So it will go off. D3 mortal wounds on Mortarion, doing just 1 mortal wound, and D3 mortal wounds onto the Demon Prince. And that will also do just 1 mortal wound. So 1 disgustingly resilient roll on Mortarion, which is cocked, and here's the dice roll. So it will go through, so 1 damage onto Mortarion, and 1 disgustingly resilient roll on the Demon Prince, which also fails. So the Demon Prince will take 1 wound as well. So the Demon Prince will go from 8 starting wounds down to 7, and Mortarion will go from 18 starting wounds down to 17. And so now Smite from Kairos onto Mortarion. And he technically gets it with a 5. But Tzeentch is going to use 1 command point for a command reroll, going from 5 down to 4 in order to reroll the 1. And here's the reroll, making it a passed test of 8. So Mortarion will attempt to deny this as well, needing a 9, and fails with a 4. So the original test would have passed. But it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it'll do 2 mortal wounds. So Mortarion will take 2 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls, passes 1 and fails 1. So Mortarion will take 1 more damage and go from 17 wounds down to 16. So now the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will attempt to manifest Bolt of Change onto Mortarion and Smite onto the Chaos Land Raider, because the Chaos Land Raider is closer than Mortarion. So Bolt of Change first, which needs an 8 or higher, and he gets it with an 11. And Mortarion has 1 more Deny the Witch roll, and he also rolls a 9, but of course that fails. So D3 mortal wounds, and it will do just 1 mortal wound. And of course Mortarion can attempt a disgustingly resilient roll, which passes. So now Smite onto the Land Raider, and gets it with a 10. Mortarion is out of Deny the Witch tests, and the other Demon Prince by the Plagueburst Crawler is too far away. It's over 24 inches, so they cannot deny it, and so it will do D3 mortal wounds onto the Land Raider, and will do just 1 mortal wound. And so this Land Raider will drop from 16 starting wounds down to 15. Finally, Magnus is going to cast Diabolic Strength on himself. He will cast Smite onto Mortarion, and he will cast Death Hex onto Mortarion. So, starting with Smite, and he gets it with a 7. The Demon Prince of Nurgle is within 24 inches of Magnus, and so he can attempt to deny the Witch, and fails by rolling a 5. So this will do d6 mortal wounds, and it will do 4 mortal wounds. 4 disgustingly resilient rolls, passes 1, and fails 3. So Mortarion will drop from 16 wounds down to 13. Now for Death Hex, which has a warp charge value of 8, and he gets to re-roll the 1, thanks to himself, and it passes with an 8. And there are no more Deny the Witch tests to take on the board, and so Death Hex will go off. And then finally, Diabolic Strength onto himself, which needs a 6, and he gets that with a 9. So Magnus will now have +2 strength to his strength characteristic and +1 attack to his attack characteristic until the start of the next Tzeentch Psychic phase. And so finally, in the Tzeentch Psychic phase, Tzeentch will use the stratagem Magical Boon for 1 command point, bringing them from 4 down to 3. Use this stratagem at the end of your Psychic phase, select a Tzeentch Demon Psyker from your army. It can immediately attempt to manifest 1 additional Psychic power this turn. And the target will be Magnus the Red, and he is going to attempt to manifest Warp Time onto himself. And so Warp Time has a warp charge value of 6. And it goes off with an 11. This means that Magnus will be able to move up to 16 inches as if it were the movement phase. And so Magnus will finish his movement right here. He is just over an inch away from both Mortarion and the Demon Prince of Nurgle. So now going into the shooting phase, we will start with this squad of Pink Horrors, and they will shoot into Mortarion because they are all within 18 inches. 16 shots, hitting on 5s. And 1 cocked dice, here's the reroll, getting 5 hits, wounding on 6s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up armor saves, and passes both. Then the blue Soul Grinder will fire its Harvester Cannon into Mortarion and its Phlegm Bombardment into the Chaos Land Raider. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 5s, and getting 2 hits, wounding on 4s, and failing to wound. And then D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, getting 3 shots, hitting on 5s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 4, and it fails to wound. So going into the assault phase for Tzeentch turn 1, we have 3 charges to declare. The first is Magnus will declare a multi-charge into Mortarion and the Demon Prince of Nurgle. Second will be the Lord of Change declaring its 9-inch charge into the Chaos Land Raider. And finally will be Kairos Fateweaver from here declaring its 8-inch charge into Mortarion, but he will need a 10 since he will be charging through a crater. And because it's the most important one here, we will start with Magnus. And Mortarion will shoot the Lantern in Overwatch, hitting on a 6, but re-rolling the 1 thanks to himself. And here's the re-roll, still failing to hit. And here's the charge range, needing at least a 3, and he gets it with a 7. So Magnus is now in base to base with both Mortarion and the Demon Prince. Next we will do Kairos Fateweaver, and there is no more Overwatch since Mortarion is already locked in combat. And he's looking for a 10-inch charge, and he fails with a 7. And that's not worth re-rolling because he'd have to roll a 6. So finally, the Lord of Change will roll a 9-inch charge, but first we have Overwatch. 2 twin last cannons, 4 shots, hitting on 6s, and all fail to hit. Combi Bolter, 4 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit and 2 rerolls. Of course, that weapon hits. And here's the rerolls, getting just the 1 hit. Wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. Finally, the 6 shots from the Twin Heavy Bolter, hitting on 6s, rerolling 1s. And here's the rerolls, so getting 2 hits, wounding on 5s, and failing to wound. And so here's the charge distance, needing at least a 9, and fails with a 5, but Tzeentch will use 1 command point, going from 3 down to 2 in order to re-roll the 1, and looking for a 5 or a 6. Still fails to make it in, so the Lord of Change will not make it into combat. So now we will go into the fight phase of Tzeentch turn 1, which means we need to resolve Mortarion's host of plagues, and then we will go into Magnus's attacks. So on a 4-up on Magnus, and it fails to go off. And now that it's the start of the fight phase as well, Tzeentch is going to use the stratagem Warp Surge, and they will use their last 2 command points, going from 2 down to 0. Use this stratagem at the start of any phase, select a unit of demons, Until the end of the phase, you cannot reroll saving throws for this unit, but its invulnerable save is improved by 1 to a maximum of 3 up. And of course, that will be Magnus the Red, and so in this fight phase, he will have an invuln of 3 up. And Magnus, thanks to Diabolic Strength, has +1 attack, and since he's at full health, he has 8 attacks because of Diabolic Strength. So 8 attacks with the Blade of Magnus, and he will place 7 onto Mortarion and 1 onto the Demon Prince of Nurgle. So, starting with the 7 attacks onto Mortarion, hitting on 2s, and rerolling the 1 thanks to himself, and getting 7 hits, wounding on 2s, and getting 6 wounds. Thanks to Death Hex, Mortarion will not have a save since it is -4 AP, and they do 3 damage apiece, so that is 18 damage. 18, 5 up disgustingly resilient rolls, and he only passes 2, failing 16. That was a really bad disgustingly resilient roll. And so after failing 16, there's no point in re-rolling one of them because he only has 13 wounds left, and so he fails with 3 points of overkill, and so that will kill off Mortarion, and this does mean we have to roll to see if he explodes. So on a 4-up, he suffers Putrid Demise, and he does. So all enemy units within 7 inches suffer D3 mortal wounds. So D3 mortal wounds onto Magnus, and it will do 2 mortal wounds. But this does mean that Mortarion is killed off and removed. And then, thanks to Putrid Demise, Magnus will drop from 18 wounds down to 16. And so then the 1 attack with the Blade of Magnus onto the Demon Prince of Nurgle. Hitting on a 2 and it hits, wounding on a 2 and it wounds, 1 5-up invulnerable save, which passes. So then the Demon Prince will attack back onto Magnus, 7 attacks with its 2 sets of Malefic Talons, hitting on 2s, getting 7 hits, wounding on 4s. Ooh, that's bad, and only getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. And they do 2 damage apiece, so that will drop Magnus from 16 wounds down to 14. And now they will be locked in combat. So going into the morale phase, there are no morale tests to take. And so taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they do need to roll a dice for the Great Game. They are currently holding 3 objective markers. So if they roll a 3, they get 3 points. And they do, of course. And they also get 1 victory point for secure objective 4, thanks to those pink horrors. But they failed to get overwhelming firepower, and since one of the soul grinders is already dead, they don't really have much in terms of shooting, so they will throw overwhelming firepower away. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 1, thanks to slaying Mortarion, who was the warlord, Tzeentch has 5 victory points, and the Death Guard have 1 victory point. Going into Death Guard turn 2, a reminder that the Death Guard have 3 command points left, and Tzeentch has 0 command points left. Also a reminder that the Death Guard held on to Assassinate and Blood and Guts from the previous turn. And so they draw 1 new tactical objective card, Secure Objective 5. Score 1 victory point if you control Objective Marker 5 at the end of your turn. And Objective Marker 5 is right here, currently being held by a squad of pink horrors in the Tzeentch deployment zone. So going into the movement phase, Death Guard will start by having this squad of Nurgling Swarms sitting on Objective Marker 1 remain still. Next, this squad of Nurgling Swarms sitting on Objective Marker 6 will also remain still. This Plagueburst Crawler will remain still. This Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings is going to move 12 inches towards Magnus the Red. And the Demon Prince will end up right here, and he is about 4.5 inches away from Magnus the Red, and thanks to the gap in between the 2 craters that Magnus is sitting on, he can make it within an inch of Magnus without having to travel through the craters, and so he will only need a 4-inch charge in order to make it into combat. The Demon Prince of Nurgle, currently locked in combat with Magnus the Red, will remain locked in combat. Finally, everyone inside of this Land Raider is going to disembark. and they will disembark like so, with the Tallyman here, Malignant Plaguecaster here, Plague Surgeon here, and then the 7 Plague Marines. Next, the Chaos Land Raider will fall back a couple of inches, and it will fall back here, making sure to stay within 12 inches of the Lord of Change so that the Combi Bolter can rapid fire if it wants. Now the Plague Marines are going to move 5 inches up the board towards the Lord of Change, and they will all finish their movement right here. Next, the Plague Surgeon will move up the board 5 inches, and it will finish its movement right here. Now the Malignant Plaguecaster will move up the board 5 inches, and he will finish his movement right here. And then finally, the Tallyman will move up the board 5 inches. And he will finish his movement right here. So going into the Psychic phase, the Malignant Plaguecaster will start by attempting to manifest Putrescent Vitality onto the Plague Marines, and he will also attempt to manifest Smite onto the Lord of Change. Starting with Smite, which has a Warp Charge value of 5, and he gets it with a 9. The Lord of Change will attempt to deny the Witch, and fails by rolling an 8. So it will go off and it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it will do 2 mortal wounds. And so the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will fall from 16 wounds down to 14. And now for Putrescent Vitality onto the Plague Marines, which needs a 6, and fails with a 4. So the Death Guard are going to use 1 command point, going from 3 down to 2, in order to re-roll the 1. And here's the re-roll, and so they pass with an 8. Now, thanks to the Tallyman being out, they will roll 2 dice, and on a 7 they get the command point back. And they do, so they go back up to 3 command points. And now the Lord of Change will use its second Deny the Witch in order to attempt to deny the Witch. And he does with a 12. So good thing they got the command point back. So Putrescent Vitality will not go off. Finally, both Demon Princes will attempt to manifest Smite onto Magnus the Red, and we will start with the Demon Prince locked in combat. So the first Demon Prince with Smite on a 5, and gets it with an 8. And here's the Deny the Witch test from Magnus the Red, and he fails by also rolling an 8. So it will go off, and it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it will do just 1 mortal wound. So Magnus will fall from 14 wounds down to 13. Now the Smite from the Demon Prince that's not locked in combat, needing a 5, and he gets it with a 10. So now Magnus will attempt another Deny the Witch, and he fails with a 7. However, since the result was a 10 and not more than 10, it still only does D3 mortal wounds. Although either way, it would only do 1 mortal wound. So Magnus will now fall from 13 wounds down to 12. So going into the shooting phase, we will start with this Plague Burst Crawler, and it will fire its Heavy Slugger into this squad of 8 Pink Horrors, and it will fire its Plague Burst Mortar and its 2 Entropy Cannons into the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword. And the Plague Burst Crawler did not move, so 4 shots with the Heavy Slugger, hitting on 4s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 3s, and getting 3 wounds. 3 4-up invulnerable saves, and they fail all 3. So 3 Pink Horrors will go down, leaving just 5 models left. Next will be the 2 Entropy Cannons into the Lord of Change, hitting on 4s, and getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 3-up invulnerable save, which fails. It will do D6 damage, doing 2 damage. So the Lord of Change will drop from 14 wounds down to 12. Finally, the Plague Burst Mortar will fire D6 shots, getting 5 shots, hitting on 4s, and getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. So the Plague Burst Mortar will do D3 damage, and that's a cocked dice, rerolling the cocked dice, and it will do 2 damage. So the Lord of Change will fall from 12 wounds down to 10. So now the Chaos Land Raider, which is still within 24 inches of that squad of Pink Horrors that's now down to 5 models, will fire its Twin Heavy Bolter and its Combi Bolter into the Pink Horrors, this squad right here, and then it will fire its 2 Twin Last Cannons into the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword. Starting with the Combi Bolter, 2 shots, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, and they pass both. Now for the Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots, hitting on 3s, rerolling, wow, that's a bad roll, rerolling 1s thanks to the Demon Prince being nearby, and only getting 1 hit so far. So 3 rerolls. That's a little better, getting 4 hits. Wounding on 3s. That's a lot of 6s, getting 4 wounds. 4 up invulnerable saves. They pass 1 and fail 3. And so the 2 regular pink horrors will go down, and the pink horror with the instrument will go down. So this squad has lost 6 models this turn, and they only have 2 left. Finally, the 4 shots from the 2 twin last cannons, hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 3s, and only getting 1 wound. 1 3-up invulnerable save, which fails, and it will do d6 damage, and it will do 3 damage. So the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will drop from 10 wounds down to 7. And so finally, all of these various units will fire their weapons into the Lord of Change. The Tallyman will start by firing his plasma pistol, and he will fire a supercharged shot since he is within 6 inches of the Demon Prince, so he can reroll hit rolls of 1. Then the Plague Marines will fire a bolt pistol from the Plague Champion, and a crack grenade into the Lord of Change, and they are also within 6 inches. They will get to reroll hit rolls of 1. Then the Plague Surgeon will fire a bolt pistol. However, he is not within 6 inches of the Demon Prince, so he will not get any rerolls. And finally, the Malignant Plaguecaster will fire a bolt pistol, and he is also not within 6 inches of the Demon Prince. So, starting with the Tallyman and his plasma pistol, supercharged shot, hitting on 3. And it straight up misses. And because they don't want to risk re-rolling and getting a 1, they will not re-roll that using a command point. So now the Plague Champion and his bolt pistol hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. Crack grenade hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 5, and it wounds. 1 3-up invulnerable save, which fails. So it will do d3 damage, and it'll do 2 damage. So the Lord of Change will drop from 7 wounds down to 5. Now the bolt pistol from the Plague Surgeon hitting on a 3, and it fails to hit. Finally, the bolt pistol from the Malignant Plaguecaster hitting on a 3, and it hits, wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. So going into the assault phase, there are many charges to declare. First will be this Demon Prince of Nurgle declaring a charge into Magnus the Red, and then all 4 units here will declare a charge onto the Lord of Change. And there is no Overwatch, so we will start with the Demon Prince onto Magnus. The Demon Prince needs a 4-inch charge to make it in, and he does with a 9. And he is now locked in combat with Magnus the Red. Next, the Plague Marines will charge. They get 8 inches, and they will all make it into combat. Next, the Tallyman will attempt to charge in, and here's the charge distance, getting 9 inches, and that is enough to put him in base to base. So next, the Malignant Plaguecaster will charge in, and here's the charge range, getting 8 inches, and that will be enough for the Malignant Plaguecaster to make it in. Finally, the Plague Surgeon will attempt to charge in, and here's the charge distance, getting 8 inches as well. And the Plague Surgeon will end up in combat right here. He is just over an inch away from the Soul Grinder, so staying out of combat with the Soul Grinder. So going into the fight phase, we need to roll for Tzeentch's Loci of Trickery, rolling 2 dice and taking away the highest, and so hit rolls of 3 against that Lord of Change will not count. And we will start with the first charging unit, the Demon Prince of Nurgle. 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s thanks to himself, getting 6 hits and 1 reroll. And here's the reroll, getting a 7th hit, wounding on 4s, and getting 5 wounds. 5 4-up invulnerable saves, and Magnus passes 3 of them, failing 2, taking 4 damage. So Magnus will fall from 12 wounds down to 8. And so now we will do all of the various units over here against the Lord of Change, going from left to right. So starting with the Plague Marines, then the Tallyman, then the Malignant Plaguecaster, and finally the Plague Surgeon if necessary. So with the Plague Marines, starting with the Plague Champion and his Power Fist. 2 attacks hitting on 4s, rerolling 1s and 2s. Not rerolling the 3 because modifiers happen after rerolls and the Power Fist subtracts 1 from hit rolls. So 1 reroll looking for a 4-up and still fails to hit. So now the 2 Marines with Flails of Corruption, they get D3 attacks apiece for a total of 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, rerolling the 1 and the 2, and here's the rerolls, getting 4 hits. And because Putrescent Vitality did not go off, they are only Strength 6 versus Toughness 7, so 5s to wound, getting 1 wound and 1 reroll thanks to being a plague weapon. Here's the reroll, still failing to wound. So 1 3-up invulnerable save, which passes. Finally, the 4 Marines with Bubotic Axes, 2 attacks apiece, hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s and 2s. So 5 hits so far and 3 rerolls, getting 3 more hits. But unfortunately, thanks to Loci of Trickery, 3s do not count, and so 3 of those hit rolls must be removed. So 5 hits total. Wounding on 5s, rerolling 1s, getting no wounds and 1 reroll. And here's the reroll, still failing to wound. Next, the Tallyman. 3 attacks with his fists, or the butt of his plasma pistol. 3 attacks hitting on 3s, getting 3 hits. Wounding on 5s. And of course getting 3 wounds with something that doesn't have an AP or extra damage. So 3 3-up invulnerable saves. Oh, and fails all 3. Wow. So that'll drop the Lord of Change from 5 wounds down to 2. I'd like to take a moment just to appreciate the fact that a full squad of Plague Marines, all armed with close combat weapons, didn't do anything, but a Tallyman punching the Lord of Change caused 3 wounds. That's pretty funny right there. So now the Malignant Plague Caster, 3 attacks with its Corrupted Staff, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits and 1 reroll. And here's the reroll, getting a 3rd hit. Strength 6 versus Toughness 7 means 5s to wound, and failing to wound. But Death Guard are going to use 1 command point, going from 3 down to 2, to use a command reroll in order to reroll that 4. Because the Corrupted Staff does do D3 damage apiece, and so still failing to wound, unfortunately. But on a 7, they get the command point back, and they do not, so they are permanently down to 2 command points. So the Plague Surgeon is now their last hope. 3 attacks hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit and 2 rerolls. And here's the rerolls, getting 1 additional hit. Strength 4 versus Toughness 7 means 5s to wound, and getting 1 wound. 1 3-up invulnerable save, which passes. So the Lord of Change will stay alive with 2 wounds. So now, all charging units have gone, so we will go to units that were already locked in combat or did not charge this turn. And we will start with Death Guard, so the Demon Prince of Nurgle that was locked in combat will go. Then Magnus will strike back, and then finally the Lord of Change will get to attack. So the Demon Prince has 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, getting 7 hits, wounding on 4s, and getting 6 wounds. 6 4-up invulnerable saves. And he passes 3 and fails 3, and that will do 6 damage. So Magnus the Red will fall from 8 wounds down to 2 left. And that means Magnus will get to strike back. And so Magnus, now that he's down to 2 wounds, has only 5 attacks base. However, he still has Diabolic Strength on himself, so he will have +1 attack, so he will go up to 6 attacks base, and he will place all 6 attacks on the fully healthy Demon Prince. So 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, and getting 6 hits, wounding on 2s, and getting 6 wounds. 6 5-up invulnerable saves, passes 2 and fails 4, and they are 3 damage apiece. So 12 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls, and he passes 4 but fails 8. And unfortunately, they've already used a command point in this fight phase, and so the Death Guard Demon Prince of Nurgle with wings that charged this turn is fully killed off. So now the Lord of Change will finally get to attack back. Since he's down to 2 wounds, he only has 3 attack space, and so he will put all 3 attacks with the Baleful Sword onto the Malignant Plague Caster. So 3 attacks, hitting on 3s, and gets 3 hits, wounding on 3s, and only gets 1 wound. 1 6-up armor save, which fails, and it will do D6 damage, doing just 1 damage. 1 5-up disgustingly resilient roll, but fails, but gets a 1, so thanks to the Plague Surgeon, he can re-roll. And here's the re-roll, and passes, so no damage taken. And so that's the end of the fight phase. Everyone will stay right where they are and not consolidate any further. So going into the morale phase, there is 1 morale test that needs to be taken, and it's for these Pink Horrors. They did lose 6 models this turn. And so here's the morale test, and they roll a 6. So the rest of that squad is wiped out. And so, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, thanks to the Lord of Change and Magnus both surviving with 2 wounds each, they failed to get Assassinate, the Death Guard failed to get Blood and Guts because nothing died in the fight phase, and they failed to secure Objective 5. And they will throw Secure Objective 5 away. So at the end of Death Guard turn 2, the score currently sits at 1 victory point for the Death Guard and 5 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 2, a reminder that Tzeentch has 0 command points left, and the Death Guard have 2 command points left. So Tzeentch needed to draw 3 new tactical objective cards since they had cleared their board at the end of Tzeentch turn 1. So they drew the Dominion of Chaos, score D3 victory points if you control more objective markers than your opponent at the end of this turn. Area Denial, score 1 victory point if there are no enemy models within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn. If there are no enemy models within 12 inches of the center of the battlefield at the end of your turn, score D3 victory points instead. And Big Game Hunter, score 1 victory point if at least 1 enemy unit with a wounds characteristic of 10 or more was destroyed during this turn. If at least 1 enemy unit with a wounds characteristic of 20 or more was destroyed during this turn, score D3 victory points instead. So going into the movement phase, this squad of Pink Horrors sitting on objective marker 3 will remain still. And this squad of Pink Horrors sitting on objective marker 5 will also remain still. The Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will then fall back out of combat a couple of inches. He is now no longer in combat with any of these models, and he is over an inch away. This blue Soul Grinder will remain still. Kairos Fateweaver, who is still up here, remember, will jump down. And Kairos will end up back here since he's still at full health and still has 12 inches of movement. The reason he falls back to here is because this way he is closest to the Tallyman for purposes of targeting, which means if he casts Infernal Gateway, then the Tallyman will be the target of that, meaning that any units within 3 inches will be affected by the D3 mortal wounds, or D6 depending on the dice roll for the psychic test, and the Lord of Change is just over 3 inches away from the Tallyman, so the Lord of Change would not be affected. So Kairos will not accidentally kill off the Lord of Change. And finally, Magnus the Red will remain locked in combat with the Demon Prince. So going into the Psychic phase, we will start by having the Lord of Change manifest Smite into the Plague Marines because they are the closest visible enemy unit, and he will attempt to manifest Bolt of Change onto the Tallyman. And remember that the Lord of Change no longer has a Psychic test bonus, since he's down to 2 wounds. So starting with Smite, needing a 5, and he gets it with an 8. The Malignant Plaguecaster will attempt to deny the Witch, and fails to do so. So it will cause D3 mortal wounds, doing just 1 mortal wound. 1 5-up Disgustingly Resilient roll, which fails, but getting a 1, so being able to re-roll it, and passing it with the re-roll. Now for Bolt of Change onto the Tallyman, and fails with a 5. So next, Kairos Fateweaver will attempt to manifest Gaze of Fate, and then he will attempt to manifest Infernal Gateway onto the Tallyman. And depending on how that goes, he will then either manifest Smite onto the Tallyman as well, or onto the next closest unit if the Tallyman has been killed off. So starting with Gaze of Fate, which needs a 6. And he gets it with a 6 thanks to his Psychic test bonus. The Malignant Plaguecaster will attempt its second and final Deny the Witch, and it fails with a 4. And I apologize, but the Malignant Plaguecaster actually cannot attempt to Deny the Witch, because he can only attempt 1 Deny the Witch per turn, and so that will be the Deny the Witch test from the Demon Prince, who's still alive. And so it still failed, so Gaze of Fate will go off, and this does mean that there are no more Deny the Witch tests on the table from the Death Guard. So now Infernal Gateway, which needs an 8 and fails with a 7. So Kairos will use the 1 reroll from Gaze of Fate in order to reroll the 1 in order to try to pass off Infernal Gateway. And here's the reroll, and still getting a 1. So now he will attempt to manifest Smite onto the Tallyman. Needs a 5, and gets an 11. So we'll do D6 mortal wounds, and here's the roll for that, doing just 2 mortal wounds. 2 5-up Disgustingly Resilient rolls, passes 1 and gets a 1, which can be re-rolled, and here's the re-roll, which still fails. So the Tallyman will take 1 wound. So the Tallyman will drop from 4 wounds down to 3. Finally, Magnus will attempt to manifest Death Hex onto the Demon Prince. He will attempt to manifest Smite onto the Demon Prince, and he will attempt to manifest Diabolic Strength onto himself. So, starting with Smite, and gets it with a 7. No more Psychic Test bonus for Magnus, since he is now down to 2 wounds. But it will do D6 mortal wounds thanks to his special Smite, and just does 2 mortal wounds. 2 disgustingly resilient rolls, passes 1 and fails 1. So the Demon Prince will fall from 7 wounds down to 6. Now for Death Hex, which needs an 8. And he gets it with an 8, so the Demon Prince will not be able to take invulnerable saves. And finally, Diabolic Strength, which needs a 6, and he gets it with a 7. So Magnus will have +2 strength and +1 attack until the start of the next Tzeentch Psychic phase. So going into the shooting phase, there's only one model on the Tzeentch side in range to fire, and that is the Soul Grinder, who did not move, and he will fire everything that he has into the Plague Marines. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds, 2 4-up armor saves, passes 1 and fails 1, and it does D3 damage, and it will do 3 damage. So 3 disgustingly resilient rolls, passes 1 and fails 2, but only 1 Plague Marine will go down. And so 1 Bubotic Axe will go down. So now D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, getting 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 3 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 3 wounds, 3 5-up armor saves, and they fail all 3, and they do 3 damage apiece. So shot number 1. 1 Plague Marine will go down after failing 2 disgustingly resilient rolls. Shot number 2, 3 disgustingly resilient rolls, and a 2nd Plague Marine will go down. And the 3rd shot, 3 disgustingly resilient rolls, passes 2 and fails 1, but rolls a 1, so he gets to re-roll, and here's the re-roll, but still fails, so another Plague Marine will go down. And so the final 3 Bubotic Axes will go down. So going into the Assault phase, we have 2 charges to declare. First is the Soul Grinder declaring a charge into just the Plague Surgeon, and second is Kairos Fateweaver declaring a charge into the Tallyman and the Plague Marines. So we will start with the Soul Grinder. Overwatch from the Plague Surgeon, 1 bolt pistol, hitting on a 6, and it fails to hit. Now for charge range, needing at least a 3 since he's charging through a crater, and he makes it in with a 5. And so the Soul Grinder is now in combat with the Plague Surgeon. Now the Tallyman will overwatch with his Plasma Pistol, and he will fire a standard shot since he can no longer reroll 1s, and misses with a 3. The Plague Champion will overwatch with a bolt pistol, hitting on a 6, and fails to hit. And finally, 1 Marine will toss a crack grenade, hitting on a 6 and fails to hit. Here's the charge range, and he makes it in with an 8. And so now Kairos will be in combat with the Tallyman and the Plague Marines. Going into the fight phase, we first need to roll for the Loci of Trickery, subtracting the highest. And so hit rolls of 3 against both Kairos and the Soul Grinder, since it's within 6 inches of Kairos, will not count. And so going into the fighting portion of the fight phase, we will start with Kairos Fateweaver. So Kairos Fateweaver, who is still at full health, has 5 attacks base, and he will place 2 attacks onto the Plague Marines and 3 attacks onto the Tallyman. Starting against the Tallyman, 3 attacks hitting on 3s with the Staff of Tomorrow, and getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, and getting 2 wounds. Minus 3 AP, so 2 6-up armor saves, and both fail. These do D6 damage apiece, for a total of 11 damage. 6 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls. Passes 3, 2 rerolls, but 6 definite fails, and so that will be more than enough to kill off the Tallyman with 3 wounds left. And so the Tallyman is removed. And now for the 2 attacks onto the Plague Marines, hitting on 3s, getting 1 hit, wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 6-up armor save, which fails. It will do D6 damage, doing 3 damage. 3 disgustingly resilient rolls, fails all 3, but only 1 Marine will go down. And so 1 regular Marine with a Flail of Corruption will go down. And so now, The Death Guard will use their final 2 command points, going from 2 down to 0, and unfortunately they do not get to roll to try to get those command points back because the Tallyman is now dead, in order to use the stratagem Counteroffensive. This stratagem is used right after an enemy unit that charged has fought. Select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. And the Death Guard are going to select their Demon Prince to fight. And also, before I forget, and this is the first time that I've ever actually had the opportunity to use this, which is why I forgot to do it at the proper time, but the Malignant Plaguecaster can actually heroically intervene since he is within 3 inches of a couple of enemy charging units. And so I would have selected for him to attack Kairos, who is the Warlord, because that's the more important target to take down. So I apologize for forgetting to do that in the assault phase, but we will do that now. It would have ended up about here to leave room where the Tallyman was, but the Malignant Plaguecaster will be in combat with Kairos Fateweaver, and that would not have changed the targets that I would have selected for Kairos. I wanted to take out the Tallyman in this fight phase for Tzeentch, and I wanted to try to take out another Plague Marine or 2 in order to make their morale test that much harder to pass. So none of the targets would have changed, but the Malignant Plaguecaster will get to fight this phase as well. But the Demon Prince, using Counteroffensive, 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s thanks to himself. And here's the reroll, getting 7 hits, wounding on 4s. Wow, and getting 6 wounds. 6 4-up invulnerable saves, and Magnus has to pass every single one of these, and he fails 4. So that will mean that Magnus will be killed off. He does not have any sort of explosion to roll for, and so the Demon Prince will simply consolidate a couple of inches. And the Demon Prince will consolidate to here. So then the final charging unit will go, which will be the Soul Grinder, onto the Plague Surgeon, and then the Malignant Plaguecaster and the Plague Marines will attack back against Kairos Fateweaver, and if still alive, the Plague Surgeon will attack back against the Soul Grinder. So the Soul Grinder, who is still at full health, has 5 attacks base, and he will use all 5 attacks with his Warp Sword against the Plague Surgeon, hitting on 4s. Getting 3 hits and 2 rerolls thanks to the Warp Sword. Here's the 2 rerolls. And getting 5 hits. Wounding on 3s. And getting 5 wounds. Minus 3 AP, so 5-up armor saves. Fails 3, but passes 2. And so first rolling 2 4-ups for mortal wounds, and both fail. So no mortal wounds reflected back onto the Soul Grinder. And finally, the 3 that go through do 3 damage apiece, so 9 disgustingly resilient rolls. Passes 2, gets 2 rerolls, but 5 definite fails. And so the Plague Surgeon is killed off, since he only has 4 wounds. And so the Plague Surgeon is now killed off. And so then the Soul Grinder will consolidate 3 inches in order to be within an inch of the Malignant Plaguecaster, and is now in combat with the Malignant Plaguecaster. So now the Malignant Plaguecaster is going to attack Kairos Fateweaver, 3 attacks, hitting on 3s, but subtracting out the 3s because of the Loci of Trickery, but getting 3 hits. Wounding on 5s, getting 2 misses and 1 cocked dice. Rerolling the cocked dice, and getting a 3rd failed wound. So now, the Plague Marines will attack back, and we will start with the Plague Champion. And the Plague Champion will use his Power Fist, so 2 attacks hitting on 4s, and both fail to hit. Then the 1 Marine with the Flail of Corruption, D3 attacks, getting 1 attack, hitting on a 4, and failing to hit. So going into the morale phase, the Plague Marines will need to take a morale check, and before I forget, the champion would have piled in before attacking. Not that that really matters too much, but they will have to take a morale check, and they've lost 5 models this turn. And the champion has a leadership of 8, so on a 3 or lower, they pass. On a 4 or higher, they lose more models. And they roll a 4, so 1 more model will go down. And so the Flail of Corruption will be killed off, leaving only the champion left alive. And so, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Tzeentch failed to achieve the Dominion of Chaos because they only control 2 objective markers. However, they did complete area denial because there are no enemies within 6 inches of the center of the board, so 1 victory point. However, thanks to that Plague Champion staying alive, he is partially within 12 inches. And so because of that, it denies the D3 victory points. And Tzeentch also failed to complete Big Game Hunter. However, Tzeentch will hold on to the Dominion of Chaos and Big Game Hunter. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 2, the score currently sits at 6 victory points for Tzeentch and 1 victory point for the Death Guard. Going into Death Guard turn 3, a reminder that the Death Guard have 0 command points left, and Tzeentch has 0 command points left. Also a reminder that the Death Guard held on to Assassinate and Blood and Guts from the previous turn. And so the new tactical objective card will be Priority Orders Received, and the bonus tactical objective that was generated because of that was Defend Objective 2, but it does not matter because Mortarion is dead, and therefore it is impossible to complete that tactical objective card. So going into the movement phase, this Plague Burst Crawler will remain still. This squad of Nurgling Swarms sitting on objective marker 6 will remain still. This squad of Nurglings sitting on objective marker 1 will also remain still. The Malignant Plaguecaster will remain locked in combat with Kairos Fateweaver. The Plague Champion will also remain locked in combat with Kairos Fateweaver. This Demon Prince is going to move up to 12 inches just to be just over an inch away from Kairos Fateweaver. And it will finish its movement over here so that once it charges in, both the Plague Champion and the Malignant Plaguecaster will be able to benefit from his aura of rerolling hit rolls of 1. And finally, the Land Raider will also move up the board in order to get back into 6-inch coherency with the Demon Prince. And it will finish its movement right here. So going into the Psychic phase, the Malignant Plaguecaster is going to attempt to manifest Putrescent Vitality onto himself. Then he will attempt to manifest Smite onto Kairos Fateweaver. And then the Demon Prince of Nurgle will also attempt to manifest Smite onto Kairos Fateweaver. Starting with Putrescent Vitality onto himself, which needs a 6. And it fails with a 4, and they have no more command points for rerolls. So now the Malignant Plaguecaster will attempt to manifest Smite onto Kairos, needing a 5, and he gets it with a 7. Kairos will attempt to deny the Witch, and he does with a 12. So finally, the Demon Prince will attempt to manifest Smite, and fails with a 4. So none of the 3 psychic powers will go off. Going into the shooting phase, both the Malignant Plaguecaster and the Plague Champion will attempt to fire their bolt pistols at Kairos Fateweaver. Malignant Plaguecaster first, hitting on a 3, and it fails to hit. And of course, it's not a 1, so it can't be rerolled. Now the Plague Champion, hitting on a 3, hitting a 1, but that can be rerolled, and gets a hit with a 6. Wounding on a 5. And fails to wound. So now this Plague Burst Crawler is going to fire everything that it has onto this squad of pink horrors sitting on objective marker 3, and they are within 36-inch range. Starting with the Heavy Slugger, 4 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 3s, getting 1 wound, 1 4-up invulnerable save, which passes. 2 Entropy Cannons, hitting on 4s, 1 hit, 1 miss, wounding on a 2, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails, so 1 pink horror will go down. And so this one will be removed. Finally, the Plague Burst Mortar, D6 shots, getting 3 shots, hitting on 4s, and getting 3 hits, wounding on 2s, and only getting 2 wounds. But re-rolling 1s thanks to being a plague weapon, and getting a 3rd wound. 3 4-up invulnerable saves, passing 1, failing 2. And so 2 more pink horrors will go down, leaving 7 left. And so now, because it has to, because it doesn't have any better targets, the Chaos Land Raider is going to fire its Combi Bolter and its 2 twin Last Cannons into the Soul Grinder with Baleful Sword, and then the Chaos Land Raider will fire its twin Heavy Bolter at this squad of pink horrors sitting on objective marker 5. Starting with the Combi Bolter, 4 shots, hitting on 3s, and re-rolling the 1. Here's the reroll, getting 4 hits, wounding on 5s, getting 2 wounds. 2 3-up armor saves, or 3-up invulnerable saves, and fails 1. So the Lord of Change will drop from 2 wounds down to 1 left. Now the 4 shots from the 2 twin Last Cannons, hitting on 3s, getting 2 hits, 1 miss, and 1 reroll. And here's the reroll, getting a 3rd hit, wounding on 3s, and getting 3 wounds. The Lord of Change has to pass all 3-up invulnerable saves, or it dies. Here's the rolls, and passes all 3 of them. And so the Lord of Change is going to survive at least 1 more turn. Oh no. And so now the Twin Heavy Bolter will fire at the Pink Horrors, and unfortunately it already declared, so it cannot change its target. So 6 shots hitting on 3s. And getting 2 definite misses and 1 reroll. Here's the 1 reroll, getting 4 hits, wounding on 3s, and getting 3 wounds. Now just for fun, when I roll the invulnerable saves, I am going to do the 5 separate from the 3s, only because if when I roll the 5, if I rolled a 1 or a 2, that would have killed the Lord of Change. So here's the 1 wound against that. While it's on the Pink Horrors now, this is what it would look like. And it would have gone through. So 1 Pink Horror is dead, and now the other two, those both pass. But of course, by not focusing on 1 model, they failed to bring him down. And instead only managed to bring down 1 Pink Horror anyways. And so now, going into the assault phase, there is just 1 charge to declare, and that is the Demon Prince charging into Kairos. He is just over an inch away, and there's no overwatch, so he will automatically make it in. And so now the Demon Prince of Nurgle, with 6 wounds left, is in combat with Kairos Fateweaver, and the Demon Prince will attack first. But first, we need to roll for the Loci of Trickery, subtracting the highest, and so hit rolls of 1 will not count, even though they already didn't. So, Demon Prince of Nurgle, 7 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, getting 5 hits and 2 rerolls. And here's the 2 rerolls, still getting 1 fail. So 6 hits total. Wounding on 4s, getting 4 wounds. 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 2 and fails 2. And they do 2 damage apiece, so Kairos Fateweaver will fall from 16 starting wounds down to 12. And so now going into units that did not charge this turn, starting with the Death Guard unit, we will start with the Plague Champion with his Power Fist. 2 attacks from the Plague Champion, hitting on 4s, rerolling 1s, and both failed. So now Kairos will get to attack next. Since Kairos still has 12 wounds, he still has 5 attacks base with his Staff of Tomorrow, and he will place all 5 attacks onto the Demon Prince. Hitting on 3s, and only getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. Minus 3 AP, so the Demon Prince will take 2 6-up armor saves, because remember, he's still Death Hexed from Tzeentch turn 2. So 2 6-up armor saves, passes 1 and fails 1, and it will do D6 damage, and it does 2 damage. So 2 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls, passes 1 and fails 1. So the Demon Prince will drop from 6 wounds down to 5. And now the Malignant Playcaster will get to attack. 3 attacks with its Corrupted Staff, hitting on 3s, rerolling the 1s thanks to the Demon Prince. So getting 2 rerolls and getting 3 hits, wounding on 5s and failing to wound. So now finally, the Soul Grinder will strike against the Malignant Plaguecaster. The Soul Grinder is still at full health, so he has 5 attacks, and he will use all 5 attacks with the Warp Sword. Hitting on 4s, and getting 4 hits, but re-rolling thanks to the Warp Sword. And here's the reroll. Getting 5 hits. Strength 8 versus Toughness 5 means 3s to wound, and getting 3 wounds. Minus 3 AP, so 3 6-up armor saves, and passes 1. But 2 go through and they do 3 damage apiece, so 6 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls. Passes 2 and fails 4. And so the Malignant Plaguecaster is killed off. And so the Malignant Plaguecaster will be removed. And so now the Soul Grinder will consolidate forward a couple of inches. However, he will make sure to remain over an inch away from any enemy models in order to be able to shoot in Tzeentch turn 3. And the Soul Grinder will finish up like so. Going into the morale phase, this squad of Pink Horrors lost 1 model, but since they have a leadership of 7, it is impossible for them to fail a morale check. And finally, this squad lost 3 models this turn, so they will have to take a morale check. So, leadership of 7, and they lost 3 models, so if they roll a 5 or a 6, they will lose more. And they do not, so they pass their morale check. And so, unfortunately for the Death Guard, taking a look at the tactical objective cards, they still failed to achieve Assassinate. They have still failed to achieve Blood and Guts, and they definitely failed to achieve Priority Orders Received, Bonus Objective, Defend Objective 2, and they will throw this one away. And so, at the end of Death Guard turn 3, the score currently sits at 1 victory point for the Death Guard and 6 victory points for Tzeentch. So, going into Tzeentch turn 3, a reminder that Tzeentch held on to the Dominion of Chaos and Big Game Hunter from the previous turn, but they draw a new tactical objective card, which is Scour the Skies. Score 1 victory point if at least one enemy unit that can fly was destroyed during this turn. So, going into the movement phase, this squad of Pink Horrors will remain still. This squad of Pink Horrors will remain still. The Blue Soul Grinder will remain still. Kairos Fateweaver will remain locked in combat with the Demon Prince of Nurgle and the Plague Champion. The Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, which is somehow still alive with 1 wound left, is going to move 6 inches up the board. And so the Lord of Change will finish its movement right here. It is over 1 inch away from the Demon Prince and the Plague Champion, and it is closer to the Demon Prince for the purpose of targeting. So, going into the Psychic phase, we will start with Kairos Fateweaver attempting to manifest Gaze of Fate. Gaze of Fate has a warp charge value of 6, and he gets it with a 9, since he is still at +2 Psychic Test bonus. The Demon Prince will attempt its 1 Deny the Witch, and passes with a 12, so Gaze of Fate will not go off. So now, Kairos will attempt to manifest Smite onto the Demon Prince. And here's the roll. And gets it with a 13, and it does not cause Perils of the Warp. So, D6 mortal wounds, causing 4 mortal wounds. 4 disgustingly resilient rolls, and passes all 4 of them. Oh, wow. Okay, wow. So now, Kairos will attempt to manifest Bolt of Change onto the Demon Prince, which needs an 8, and he gets it with a 9. So it will do D3 mortal wounds, and it'll do just 1. 1 5-up disgustingly resilient roll, which passes. So now, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will attempt to manifest Smite onto the Demon Prince, needing a 5, and he gets it with a 9. He has no more Psychic Test bonus, however, so it is just a 9. D3 mortal wounds, causing 3 mortal wounds. 3 disgustingly resilient rolls, and passes 1, failing 2. So the Demon Prince will drop from 5 wounds down to 3. And finally, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will attempt to manifest Boon of Change onto Kairos Fateweaver. And he gets it with a 9. So rolling a D3 on the table, getting a 1, which is extra limb, +1 attack. So Kairos will have +1 attack until the start of the next Tzeentch Psychic phase. So now, going into the shooting phase, the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch is going to fire everything that it has into the Land Raider. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 5, and it fails to wound. D6 shots from the Phlegm Bombardment, getting 1 shot, hitting on a 4, and it hits. Wounding on a 4, and it wounds. 1 4-up armor save, which passes. So, going into the assault phase, we have 2 charges to declare. First will be the Soul Grinder, declaring a charge into the Plague Champion, and it will also declare a multi-charge into the Demon Prince of Nurgle. Then, the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword will declare a multi-charge into the Demon Prince of Nurgle and the Land Raider. And we will start with the Lord of Change, meaning we will start with Overwatch. 4 shots from the Combi Bolter, hitting on 6s, getting 2 hits, wounding on 5s, getting 1 wound. 1 3-up invulnerable save, which fails, and the Lord of Change is killed. But the Lord of Change has not used its Impossible Rogue reroll yet, so it will get 1 shot to reroll that invuln, and it still goes off. And because it rolled a 1, it kills itself. But it only had 1 wound left anyway, so either way, it was dead. And so the Lord of Change is removed. Now for the charge distance from the Soul Grinder. getting 7 inches. And so the Soul Grinder is now in combat with both, thanks to the corner right here being just within an inch of that Demon Prince of Nurgle. And so he is in combat with both. So at the start of the fight phase, we need to activate Tzeentch's Loci of Trickery, and so hit rolls of 3 will not count. And so, because it is the only unit that successfully charged this turn, the Soul Grinder will go first, and it is still at full health. So 5 attacks with the Warp Sword onto the Demon Prince, hitting on 4s, and re-rolling thanks to the Warp Sword. Here's the reroll, getting 4 hits, wounding on 3s, and getting 3 wounds. The Demon Prince is no longer death hexed, so 3 5-up invulnerable saves, and fails all 3. And they are 3 damage apiece, so 9 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls. The Demon Prince has 3 wounds left, so it has to pass at least 7 in order to stay alive. And here's the rolls, passing 2, failing 7. That's the opposite of what it wanted to do. And so it dies with 4 points of overkill. And now the Demon Prince is removed. So now that the charging units have gone, now the units that did not charge will get to go, starting with Tzeentch, since it's Tzeentch's turn. So Kairos will get to strike against the Plague Champion. And Kairos is still in his top tier on his damage table, so he still has 5 attacks base, plus 1 attack since he was successfully booned by the deceased Lord of Change. So 6 attacks with the Staff of Tomorrow onto the Plague Champion, hitting on 3s and getting 5 hits, wounding on 3s and getting 5 wounds, minus 3 AP, so 5 6-up armor saves, and fails all of them. 5d6 damage, and that is 20 damage. So, can a single Plague Champion with 1 wound survive 20 5-up disgustingly resilient rolls? Well, he did better than I thought. He passed 9, but failed 11. And so the Plague Champion is killed off. And unfortunately for Death Guard, luckily for Tzeentch, this means that Kairos Fateweaver is now going to consolidate into combat with the Land Raider. Right to there, which means unless somehow the Land Raider is able to kill Kairos Fateweaver in this fight phase, it will not be able to shoot next turn. And then finally, the Soul Grinder will also consolidate up to 3 inches up the board. And he will consolidate right to here. So now we will resolve the attacks from the Land Raider onto Kairos Fateweaver. The Land Raider is still at 15 wounds, so 6 attacks, hitting on 6s, and failing to hit. So Kairos and the Land Raider will remain locked in combat, and going into the morale phase, there are no morale tests to take. So taking a look at the tactical objective cards, Tzeentch still has not completed the Dominion of Chaos. They have still failed to complete Big Game Hunter, but thanks to killing that Demon Prince, they did complete Scour the Skies, and they will hold on to Dominion of Chaos and Big Game Hunter once again. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 3, the score currently sits at 7 victory points for Tzeentch and 1 victory point for the Death Guard. Going into Death Guard turn 4, a reminder that they held on to Assassinate and Blood and Guts from the previous turn. And so the Death Guard draw 1 new tactical objective card, and they draw Spread Contagion. When this tactical objective is generated, nominate one of your Death Guard characters, score 1 victory point if that character is still alive at the end of the game. And unfortunately for the Death Guard, all of their characters are dead. All 6 of them. So that is a worthless tactical objective card. And so going into the movement phase, Death Guard is in a very bad situation here. So they are going to start by having this squad of Nurgling Swarms sitting on objective marker 6. They're going to move up the board 5 inches towards Kairos Fateweaver, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, getting an additional 6 inches for 11 inches of total movement. And so they will end up right here. And so now this Nurgling Swarm sitting on objective marker 1 is also going to move up the board 5 inches, and they will also declare an advance. And here's their advance roll, and they will get 5 inches of advance for 10 inches of total movement. And the Nurglings will end their movement right here. Now the Chaos Land Raider is going to fall back away from Kairos Fateweaver out of combat up to 10 inches. And it will fall back all the way to here. Finally, this Plague Burst Crawler will remain still. Going into the shooting phase, the Chaos Land Raider is going to pop smoke. since it can't fire anyways. And finally, the Plague Burst Crawler is going to shoot everything it has into Kairos Fateweaver since he is within 36 inches. There are no psychic tests for the Death Guard because all of their psychers have been killed off. So starting with the Heavy Slugger, 4 shots, hitting on 4s, and getting 3 hits. Wounding on 5s, and failing to wound. 2 Entropy Cannons, hitting on 4s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which fails, and it will do d6 damage, doing just 1 damage. So Kairos Fateweaver will fall from 12 wounds down to 11. Finally, d6 shots from the Plague Burst Mortar, getting 4 shots. Hitting on 4s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 3s, getting 2 wounds. 2 4-up invulnerable saves, passes 1 and fails 1. This will do d3 damage, doing 2 damage. So this will take Kairos from 11 wounds down to 9, which means he is still in his highest tier on his damage chart with full movement and +2 psychic test bonus. And that's the end of the shooting phase. There are no charges to declare in the assault phase. There are no fights to resolve in the fight phase, and there are no morale tests to take in the morale phase. So, at the end of Death Guard turn 4, they have still failed to complete Assassinate, they have still failed to complete Blood and Guts, and they definitely did not complete Spread Contagion, and they will throw that one away. And so, at the end of Death Guard turn 4, the score currently sits at 1 victory point for the Death Guard, and 7 victory points for Tzeentch. Going into Tzeentch turn 4, a reminder that Tzeentch held on to the Dominion of Chaos and Big Game Hunter from the previous turn. And so they draw 1 new tactical objective card, and it is Mission Critical Objective. When this tactical objective is generated, roll a d6, score 1 victory point if you control the corresponding objective marker. If the corresponding objective marker was controlled by your opponent at the start of your turn, and you control it at the end of your turn, roll d3 victory points instead. And this will be the roll for the objective marker, which is Objective Marker 2. And Objective Marker 2 is right here, currently not being controlled by anyone. So going into the movement phase of Tzeentch turn 4, this squad of 7 pink horrors will remain still. This squad of 9 pink horrors will also remain still. Kairos Fateweaver is going to jump 12 inches up the board towards the Chaos Land Raider. And so Kairos will finish his movement here. He is just over an inch away from both the Chaos Land Raider and that squad of Nurgling Swarms. However, he is slightly closer to the Chaos Land Raider for the purpose of targeting. Finally, this Soul Grinder is going to move 8 inches in this direction towards Objective Marker 2. And the Soul Grinder will finish its movement here, and it is now within 3 inches of the center of Objective Marker 2. So, going into the Psychic phase, for Tzeentch turn 4, Kairos Fateweaver is going to attempt to manifest Gaze of Fate. He will attempt to manifest Boon of Change on himself, and he will also attempt to manifest Smite onto the Land Raider. Starting with Smite, needing a 5, and he gets it with an 11, thanks to still having the +2 psychic test bonus. And so it will do d6 mortal wounds, and it will do 5. And the Chaos Land Raider does not have Disgustingly Resilient, so it will drop from 15 wounds down to 10. Next, he will attempt to manifest Gaze of Fate, which needs a 6, and he fails with a 4, so they will not have a free reroll this turn. And that is a Perils of the Warp, since it was a double 1. However, thanks to his Warlord trait, Tyrant of the Warp, roll a dice each time your Warlord suffers Perils of the Warp. On a 2-up, your Warlord's Psychic Mastery is such that they do not suffer Perils of the Warp. So here's that dice roll. Getting a 4, so Kairos will not suffer Perils of the Warp. And finally, Boon of Change onto himself, which needs a 7. And he gets it with an 11. So rolling a d3 on the table, getting a 3, which is Mystic Strength, so +1 strength. Going into the shooting phase, the Soul Grinder is going to fire everything that it has into the Land Raider. Starting with the Harvester Cannon, 3 shots, hitting on 4s. Hitting on 5s since it moved, and so all fail to hit. And now the Phlegm Bombardment, d6 shots, getting 2 shots. Hitting on 5s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 4, and it wounds. 1 4-up armor save, which fails. And the Phlegm Bombardment does an automatic 3 damage. So the Chaos Land Raider will drop from 10 wounds down to 7. Going into the Assault phase, Kairos Fateweaver is going to declare a multi-charge onto the Nurgling Swarms and the Chaos Land Raider. He is charging through a crater, but he's just over an inch away from both, and because they are close enough together, he will need just a 3-inch charge to make it in. Starting with Overwatch from the Chaos Land Raider. Combi Bolter, 4 shots, hitting on 6s, and all fail to hit. Twin Heavy Bolter, 6 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 2 hits. Wounding on 5s, and both fail to wound. Finally, the 2 Twin Last Cannons, 4 shots, hitting on 6s, getting 1 hit. Wounding on a 3, and it wounds. 1 4-up invulnerable save, which passes. So now, needing a 3-inch charge, and makes it with a 9. So Kairos Fateweaver is now in base-to-base with both the Nurgling Swarms and the Chaos Land Raider. And so since he is the only charging unit, Kairos Fateweaver will go first. And first, rolling for the Loci of Trickery. Subtracting the highest, so hit rolls of 2 will not count. And I don't think that matters in either case. And it will not, because Nurglings have a weapon skill of 4-up, and Land Raiders have a weapon skill of 6-up. So Kairos Fateweaver, who is still at 9 wounds, has 5 attacks base with the Staff of Tomorrow, and he will place all 5 attacks onto the Land Raider. Hitting on 3s. Getting 4 hits. Thanks to the +1 strength from the Boon of Change, he is now at strength 9 with the Staff of Tomorrow, because the Staff of Tomorrow is +2 strength. So wounding on 3s, and getting 2 wounds. 2 5-up armor saves, and fail both. D6 damage apiece, so 2 D6 damage, doing just 3 damage. So the Land Raider will drop from 7 wounds down to 4 left. And now the Land Raider and then the Nurgling Swarms will fight back. But the Nurglings will first pile in. So the Land Raider, now that it's down to 4 wounds, only has 1 attack, hitting on a 6, and it fails to hit. And then the Nurgling Swarms will attack. They have 4 attacks apiece for 12 attacks total, hitting on 4s, and getting 6 hits. Wounding on 6s, and all fail to wound. So they will remain locked in combat. And everyone's already pretty much in base-to-base, so there is no consolidations to do. Going into the morale phase, there are no morale tests to take. So, taking a look at the tactical objective cards. Thanks to that Soul Grinder holding Objective Marker 2, they will complete Mission Critical Objective 2, but that also means that they are holding 3 objectives, and Death Guard are currently holding 0 objectives, thanks to the Nurglings moving off of theirs, and so they will roll for D3 victory points since they are controlling more objectives than their opponent. And here's that roll, giving them just 1 additional victory point. Thanks to the Land Raider staying alive, however, they will not complete Big Game Hunter, but they will hold on to it. And so at the end of Tzeentch turn 4, the score currently sits at 9 victory points for Tzeentch and 1 victory point for the Death Guard. Going into Death Guard turn 5, a reminder that the Death Guard are holding on to Assassinate and Blood and Guts from the previous turn, but they draw 1 new tactical objective card and they draw Domination. Score D3 plus 3 victory points if you control every objective marker on the battlefield at the end of your turn. And with that, Death Guard is going to concede the game. And because the game is now over, Kairos will achieve Linebreaker for Tzeentch, giving them 1 additional victory point. And so we will have a final victory point score of 1 victory point for the Death Guard and 10 victory points for Tzeentch, and Tzeentch will have a major victory thanks to a Death Guard concession. And so now that the game is over, with the winner revealed to be Tzeentch, thanks to a Death Guard concession, and it's also been revealed that the final score in terms of victory points is 10 for Tzeentch and 1 for the Death Guard. I can go through 1 or 2 of my final thoughts on this particular game. First and foremost is that Death Guard should have conceded at the beginning of Death Guard turn 4. They played an entire extra game turn and they really shouldn't have. After drawing Spread Contagion in the beginning of Death Guard turn 4, which was once again another useless tactical objective card, they should have conceded right then and there in order to keep the spread in terms of victory points smaller, because of course Tzeentch would not have gotten Linebreaker, because it wasn't until Tzeentch turn 4 that Kairos moved into the Death Guard deployment zone. Tzeentch would not have achieved Mission Critical Objective 2. They would not have achieved the Dominion of Chaos for holding more objectives than their opponent. And so that's 3 extra victory points that Tzeentch should not have achieved this game. And so the final score should have been 7-1 instead of 10-1, which would mean Tzeentch would only have won by 6 instead of 9. And minor spoiler alert, going to talk briefly about the results from the other 2 previous matchups between Death Guard and Tzeentch. This would mean overall, if I'm doing my math correctly, that the final score in terms of victory points would actually be in Death Guard's favor, because while Death Guard would lose the series 2-1, and of course wins and losses in terms of games is what's most important. However, Death Guard might have lost the series, but they would have won by 1 victory point overall if we add up the victory points from all 3 games. And so by not conceding in turn 4 when they should have, they will most likely now, as long as I've done the math correctly in my head, overall now they will also lose in terms of victory points and not just wins and losses, which is unfortunate. Not that it really matters in the long run, but it's one of those little pet peeves of mine that it's like, they were going to lose anyways, might as well leave with more dignity than less. But there was a slight chance, had that Plague Burst Crawler, of course, done a lot more than it did, that possibly Kairos would have been at a much lower state in terms of health, which might have changed the way that the game played out. But yeah, so that's the first thing I wanted to go over, was that this game lasted a full game turn longer than it should have. Obviously, I'd rather play through a game all the way to the end, but when it's blatantly obvious that one team has the upper hand and has the victory in the bag, like Tzeentch did in this situation, it is better to concede and move on to the next game. And so the second thing that I need to talk about is a major strategic error on my part. 2 major strategic errors on my part for the Death Guard. First of which was in Death Guard turn 3, I believe it was turn 3, the Land Raider moved up in order to be within 12-inch range of the Lord of Change with its combi bolter. And it should not have done that. Should have kept it back so that Kairos would not have been able to consolidate into combat, and I should have just focused all of the weapons from the Land Raider onto that Lord of Change rather than having the twin heavy bolter split off and attack the pink horrors. It would have given the Death Guard a better chance to kill off that Lord of Change and achieve assassinate. The second major strategic error going along with that is I should have fired the Land Raider first. That way, if the Land Raider does not finish off the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword, then the Plague Burst Crawler can attempt to finish him off as well. Instead, I fired the Plague Burst Crawler first at the squad of pink horrors, thinking that the Land Raider had it taken care of, and it did not. And not only that, but the Plague Burst Crawler didn't even do much damage to the pink horrors. It killed off 3 models, and then they passed their morale check. And that squad of 7 pink horrors is still sitting there, holding that objective. They have not moved, they have not lost more models, they did not fail their morale check. Now, at that point in the game, the reasoning behind that was there was a big chance that Death Guard was going to need to table Tzeentch in order to win the game. And it still looks that way with how the score in terms of victory points turned out. But at that point, figured might as well start trying to kill off the pink horrors in the back in order to work towards tabling Tzeentch. However, then a couple things like the Demon Prince dying without really doing much damage to Kairos happened. And that wasn't a big problem. That's not something that could be controlled. That's how the dice worked. But that was an unfortunate event that did not help. That Demon Prince should have done more damage to Kairos in Death Guard turn 3, and then it died very quickly in Tzeentch turn 3, which led to Kairos consolidating into the Land Raider, which forced the Land Raider, which still had 15 wounds left, it forced the Land Raider to fall back and not be able to shoot. So that's the main strategic errors that I have to say happened in this game, at least for Death Guard. I think for Tzeentch it was actually the correct move to have the Lord of Change with Baleful Sword attempt to charge the Land Raider, because if it dies in Overwatch, it denies Death Guard from achieving Assassinate in Death Guard's turn, at least an easy Assassinate, that is. Obviously, Death Guard, if they had killed off Kairos, still could have achieved Assassinate, but it makes achieving that much harder. But if the Lord of Change makes it into combat, it then potentially can do a lot of damage to the Land Raider, and then also forces the Land Raider potentially to fall back the next turn. Now, of course, Kairos forced him to fall back, but it would have been nice if the Lord of Change would have done that. The only other thing that I really want to comment on is the difference in luck for both teams on the tactical objective cards that they drew. Because Tzeentch was able to complete 6 tactical objective cards. In this game, they only threw 1 away, whereas Death Guard did not complete any tactical objective cards, and they had to throw 1 away every single turn. And that makes a huge difference, which is why the game sort of started to spiral out of control, and another reason why they should have just conceded in Death Guard turn 4, because with the way that the game was going, the likelihood that they were going to be able to catch up in victory points was not very likely, and after the Demon Prince dying, the final Demon Prince that is, the chance for tabling Tzeentch was very low. And so there was really not much to gain unless they were very, very lucky. And as we saw, they were not. But that's enough rambling from me. I really hope you enjoyed this battle. It was actually fairly even in terms of how the armies did. The only real disruption was the number of tactical objective cards completed by each side. If it wasn't for that luck in terms of objective cards, the game actually is very, very close, with only 4 units alive for each side, 2 fairly weak troop choices, and then 2 good heavy-hitting units. So the armies were actually fairly even this battle, and the dice rolls weren't too bad either. There were some good rolls, some bad rolls. It always happens. But the armies themselves were actually fairly even this game. The only problem was the tactical objective cards, which is what caused all of the issues. So I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.